I recently wrote a two-part article for Pilates Intel. Brett Miller is the creator of this really wonderful newsletter. And if you're not a subscriber, I highly recommend it because it's free. And it's just got tons of great articles written by amazing movement educators from all over the world and all different perspectives. My article was based on developmental movement patterns, which is the foundation of my teaching. And the article was focused on the fluid nature of the body as a foundation for more complex movement. And I was really excited because someone reached out to me and had some questions about what I was saying. And I think that questioning is important. I think that curiosity is important. And I don't think it's disrespectful. I think sometimes it can feel that way, but I don't think it's disrespectful to a method that you've learned or a teacher that you've learned from, to take the material and to really work with it and experience it and see what it means, for you, rather than I'm just going to learn this, what do they say, by rote, and I'll memorize it, and that's how I teach. So I think our personal experiences with things are very valuable. I think that questioning is the way to grow our perception, and it's the way that we evolve. So I had a video where I was in a position like an ab curl. I was moving into the 100, and I was teaching it from a developmental patterns approach, which has to do with a reach of the tail. So we have these patterns we experience: yield, push, reach, pull. I'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. And in this video, I was describing reach of the tail. So the question that was given to me, I'm just gonna, read it here, is just a question from your article and video from Pilates Intel. That is, when you say your tailbone is reaching at the same time your head and your upper back is rounding and lifting, is your pelvis moving in an extension pattern, like kind of the bottom sticking out, but not rounding or taking away from the lumbar curve? And I suspect you were honoring neutral alignment even more so as you moved. So that really struck a chord with me because I've been here. I've lived in, what do I want to call it? The Church of Neutral. That was where all my training was. And it actually felt like a little naughty and a little scary for me to question some of these concepts. So before I get into that, I would like to break down a little bit, what are developmental patterns? So they're patterns of movement, and we first experience them because they are us. Sometimes I think we look at things like embryology and we read it in a book and we're like, yeah, there's that thing, but we miss the connection of like, oh, that's me. Like, I did that. I went through that. I'm still experiencing that. So when we first experience this in our cells and in our fluids. So words for these patterns: vibration, sponging, so cells breathe, the sponging; pulsating, you can think of, circulation. And these never leave us. They really are how we grow ourselves, through these patterns and these movements. And we're experiencing this through interaction and relationship with our environment. And we are weaving through these as we grow from embryo to fetus to baby to toddler, as we're learning to grow ourselves, as we are birthing ourselves, as we are navigating gravity and space after we're born, and then we're, learning to roll and sit and crawl and walk and find our hands to our mouth and our feet to our mouth, and all of that and beyond as we continue to grow and evolve. Now, we might not fully express some of these in our early experiences for many, many reasons, and we don't need to know the reason why. We can just identify, do I need a little bit more of this? Do I actually need a little less of that? And so we're process driven. So even in our adult body, until the day we take our last breath, we can actually work with these and become more integrated and easeful. That's what happens when we become more integrated. We become more easeful in our body, in our mind, in our spirit. We also might lose some of this interconnectivity later in life due to limited movement experiences, illnesses, injuries, or trauma. And these patterns have a direct influence not only on our physical, but on our perceptual, our emotional, and our cognitive process. Everything grows together. These patterns are experienced, like kind of in the simplest language, yield and push, which has everything to do with our relationship to the earth, to ground, to gravity. It's also our innerness, our center. So when we yield and push, the information is being sent in. And then we also experience these through reach and pull. And reach and pull is our relationship to space. It's the environment around us. It moves us outwards. And these really weave together. So we also want to have an integrated push. We want to have an integrated reach. So that if, a push isn't integrated, either we're just not going to be able to get going anywhere, or we're just like so hard that, we're a bull in a china shop. So, and maybe you can start to think about your movement or someone else's movement or their personality or how they approach things. Again, you can't separate it out. So we express all of these through our limbs, which includes our head and our tail. Okay, so push of the head, that's kind of the first one. They interweave, so it's not like it's like, you do one, step two, step three, but they do kind of move to the next one and then weave it back in, and move to the next one and weave it back in. And we are experiencing this first in utero when we're pushing on the uterine walls, we're getting larger. And then this push of the head is experienced through our birthing process. So, and then there's a second video that I'm going to do with some movement practices that take you through experiencing some of these in your adult body. So when we talk about neutral, let's get to neutral here. So whether it's the pelvis or the spine or the whole body, we're talking about a position, okay? And it's a term, it's a location, and it's a shape. So it's important when we want to define something so that we all know we're talking about the same thing. And I don't know why this popped into my head when I was trying to kind of come up with what I wanted to say about this, but it reminds me of the lawsuit that happened where teachers weren't allowed to use the word Pilates. And so you have to describe what it is. I mean, think about how cumbersome and time consuming that would be, and frustrating as far as communication. And there would be as many descriptions as there were teachers. So very confusing to a consumer, very confusing to try to have any kind of dialogue. So the word neutral is part of a universal, so Pilates universal language now, universal word. Neutral is part of a universal anatomical language system. And it's also said, the definition is said to be the position where there's the least amount of stress on the joints of the body, in relationship to gravity. So it's a good thing to know. We don't have to get rid of it. It's just that what it isn't is movement. It's not movement. So it doesn't reflect the development of the pelvic half within the limb bud. So, the pelvis is in a bowl. So we want to have an understanding that there's a spine that moves through that in the back. And that is a very separate, but not separate structure. So we don't want to hold. It doesn't reflect our roundness. It doesn't reflect our flowing, sporullic continuity of our body. We are a holistic, energy-based, psychophysical ecosystem. That's a little bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to say that again. We are an energy-based, holistic, psychophysical ecosystem. When we move, all of us should move, not all haphazardly, but in relationship with connectivity. When we hold a position and then try to work around it, we're fragmenting ourselves. And when we fixate, we lose our spirals, we lose our roundness, and we lose our flow. Now, this is a very different way to talk, and it's a very different language. So if this is new to you and you have an eyebrow raised, I'm so okay with that. I think it's natural, because I think that even though this is actually how we grow ourselves, it's not what we're used to hearing, okay? So some of the things that might come up is, wait a minute, what do you mean no neutral? Well, how do I keep my clients safe? I've been taught that you want to stabilize the pelvis, and that protects the lower back. But I want to toss something out here. Do we want to stabilize, or do we want motor control, movement control? Like what are we looking for? And the answer to that is, I think, complicated. I don't think it's like one size fits all, but I just want to put that out there. So, we think, well, how am I going to keep them safe? What actually keeps the body safe is balanced tone and a flow of energy through all of the structures of whatever pattern or pathway that is being focused on. So this puts us into our evolutionary relationship with gravity and space. And it puts us in relationship with ourself. So then another question might be, but what if I'm working with someone, or what if myself, I have a back issue, or I've had a back surgery, or an injury? Don't I need to be in neutral to make sure that, everything is in the right place? And, what I say to that is, we just want to constantly remember that neutral is a position. So that client might need to sense more of where they are. So that's that proprioception. They might need to just know where they are before they try to go somewhere else. So maybe they just need to kind of hang out in that location a little bit longer, so that becomes more clear. Oh, this is what this feels like. So that, because if someone doesn't feel something, they're going to drag it around, because you're still going to move, but they're going to drag it around. It's not going to be consciously embodied. So maybe that person does need to spend a little bit more time hanging out in a location. But then we want to integrate, and we want to get the energy to flow through. So a lack of body awareness is most likely part of the overall issue of, unless it was an acute injury, part of the overall issue of what's happening with them. And then also a disruption in along the line of like support, tone, and therefore that's organization, that's integration, and ultimately ease. Okay, so when we lack support, we might collapse. So some of the things that look like collapsing or are collapsing is slouching. So one of the conversations I've heard often is, there's a lot of flexion in Pilates. We're already in flexion because we sit like this all day. Shouldn't we be doing extension? But this isn't flexion, this is collapse. This is not in relationship to the rebound of the earth. This is not in relationship to being able to expand into space. This is not in relationship, with myself. This is collapse. So, other things, knock knees, forward head, fallen arches, depression, grief, fatigue, collapse. See, we can't separate. Working on yield and push to develop awareness of the rebound, like I was saying, and then being able to expand out into space is really going to help to address this issue. And where does that need to be in the body? That's very individual. And then the other thing that we might see is something called propping. So propping is like that hyperextended joints are propping. Military posture, I'm gonna have good posture, book on the head, that's propping. Gripping toes on the floor, jaw, neck tension, anxiety, hypervigilance, that's all propping. Now, most of us have a little bit of a combination of both of these happening, okay? But learning how to yield, if we're in that prop, and soften into the support of the ground really helps to release that habit. And it's really also about safety. So in my experience, and I'm going to tell you my experience because that's the only experience I can tell you about, is that holding neutral while trying to move creates a propping pattern in my body. The breath and the rhythm of the bones is disrupted. And I think it's an important thing to remember that our bones are very alive. We're so used to looking at pictures or, the skeleton in the studio like I have. We tend to think of like, oh, bones are rigid, but they have movement, they have breath. They're 25 to 30% fluid. They're constantly, I don't know what the word I want to use is, but they're growing themselves, they're regenerating. So there's movements. And then our joints, our ligaments, our connective tissue is basically like all continuous communication of the energy that's flowing in and out. When we're able to sense and feel our tone in relationship with ground and space, we are really laying the foundation for a healthy support system. We're laying the foundation for a healthy nervous system. And when we remember and we return to natural developmental patterns of our body, we're able to organize ourselves from the ground up and from the inside out. And this creates agency. Like, I know how to support myself. I know that I don't feel supported. I know that I need to rest today. I know that I need to find more, action or push today. Um, and when we are able to understand what we need and how to get that for ourselves, this develops resiliency. So this is certainly not the mainstream way to view fitness yet, but it should be, because it's how we grew ourselves. It's literally how we're growing ourselves now, because we never stop. We're always in process. And just because there is a lot of something doesn't make it right, and it doesn't necessarily make it good. And what might have been true at a time now might not be. I just want to remind you, at one point, most of humanity thought the earth was flat. So the proof in this work is experiencing it. This is not work, just like a baby didn't get a book and it says, learn how to walk. And they read this instruction manual on how they're going to walk, and then they follow the steps and then they walk. That's ridiculous, right? But we kind of do the same thing, with ourselves. Now we need guidance, because honestly, we've gotten so far away from this that it's like, where do I even begin? And so therefore we might need we might need guidance. You might need me as a guide, but that's really what I am. It's a very personal experience. We all have different stories. We all have different histories, and all of that needs to be honored in our movement practices, in our lives. And when we work from this developmental perspective, we are doing that. And so it's really in the experiencing. So the next video that goes with this, I'm going to be taking you through some developmental movement practices. A little bit more, we start a little bit more somatic, but I move it pretty quickly into more of a things you would experience in a fitness situation, because I really want to try to get that, like the bridge. But this work is incredibly beautiful to experience in a much more toned down and slower environment. And it's really actually quite necessary in order to build that foundation. So I hope that you will join me in the movement practice, and thanks for listening.